boyfriend didn't stay over. But when the footprints stopped at my door, I really started to freak out a bit. I was even compelled to say my maid's name. He's not here, you can come in and check. But somehow I just knew that it wasn't her. So I called my boyfriend and I told him that somebody was in my house. He tells me to put on some shoes and check the other rooms. I really don't want to, but I'm also not going to sleep until I'm sure that there's nobody here, so I eventually find enough courage and I put my shoes on and start walking over slowly towards my sister's room and checking with my phone light, but I see that it's empty. I check the bathroom and that's empty too. My parents' room, empty. By this time I'm getting a bit more relaxed because I think I must have imagined it. Then I go to my parents' bathroom and it's also empty. So I walk to their house closet and I scan the room with my phone light when I shed light on a human figure, and it was obviously not my maid, but I say her name, and this tall, muscular body answers, "No, it's the driver that took my parents to the airport." I freeze and try to act cool, but he invents some petty excuse like I was checking the windows were closed. I tell him that it's late, and he eventually leaves the house, and then I called my parents to verify his excuse. He was obviously lying, but he had the audacity to ask me via WhatsApp if I want him to drive me to college tomorrow. I never did see him again after this, but I often wonder, what was he doing, just standing outside my door like that? My house is on the very edge of town, right before a large wooded area. We do have neighbours. There are 6 apartments in total and some houses across the street. But it was around 11 p.m. and at that time, most of them are usually asleep or sitting in front of their TV, or perhaps both. So I went out to take my dog on a walk and noticed a bike leaning against the wall in the driveway. It seemed odd since there's a bike rack behind the house, but I didn't really think too much of it, and I just went on. When I came back, the bike was still there. Now, there are walls to both sides of the driveway, about 5 feet tall at the highest point right behind the gate. So I looked up the wall to my left, right into the cold, dead stare of a woman crouching on the wall. It nearly scared me half to death, but I just kind of stared back for a second. I had never seen this woman before, but she didn't move whatsoever. My dog also seemed rather confused and sort of scared, but I kept walking to the door, never taking my eyes off of her. Once we were past her, she jumped off the wall and started following us. At that point, my dog, a pretty big Doberman mix, began barking and growling, and that, luckily, seemed to stop her from coming any closer. I got in the house, locked the door behind me, and am once again glad that I have my dog with me. I don't know who she was or what she was up to, but the scariest part is that she was probably already standing there when I was on the way out. This happened in, I believe, July or August of 2017. My husband, our 3 daughters and I, we were at the beach having a get-together with some of my extended family who lived in that area. It was a really nice time too, and good to connect with everyone. But after a couple of hours, my second oldest, age 13 at the time, came up to me and asked if I could take her home. I could tell by her expression and tone that she was pretty tired. She and I are both introverts, and I'm sure that she was less than thrilled to be spending a nice summer night with her cousins that are all a good deal older than her. I wasn't feeling too great myself, so I found my husband and let him know that I was going to take her home and to let our other girls know too. She and I got in the car. We had brought 2 since my husband came to the beach on his own after golfing, and made the short 5-minute drive back to our house. It was only once we'd parked, gotten up onto the porch and jiggled the door handle when we realized that it was locked and we didn't have the key. My husband had the main one, and the absence of our fake rock in the garden told me that my oldest daughter had once again used the spare to get inside and had left it in the house. This was all very inconvenient, but nothing had happened before, so I told my daughter to go around back and try to climb in through the huge window above the kitchen sink. While she was making her way around the house, I tried calling my husband just in case she couldn't get in, but he didn't pick up the phone. Once again, that's not too out of the ordinary, since the reception at the beach is terrible, and he was probably busy anyway. I was in the middle of trying to call my oldest daughter when I looked through the window next to the front door, which allows you to see through to the kitchen in the back, and saw my daughter standing in the kitchen doorway. It was dark, thanks to the screen, so I could only just make out a silhouette, but it was definitely her. I mean, I know my daughter. She's quite short like me and has a very petite figure like my mum. I could recognize her from miles off. "Great job," I remember calling out. "Come unlock the door now." She didn't move. But the way that she was standing, I could tell that she was staring right at me, but she didn't move a muscle. At first, I thought that maybe she was on her phone or something, but I could clearly see her arms on either side of her. She was standing in quite an odd position as well. Her feet were a good distance apart, and her arms were sort of slightly raised from her sides. I didn't feel uneasy yet, but I was just really confused as her and I continued to stare at one another for several more seconds. "Lily?" I remember saying again. No more than 5 seconds after her name left my mouth, my daughter came jogging out from the side of the house and up the steps, telling me that she couldn't get inside because there was a screen on the kitchen window and she couldn't pry it off. I stared at my daughter, my real daughter, for multiple seconds with what must have been a very terrified expression, because her face instantly fell and she asked me if everything was okay. I couldn't answer, and I remember feeling my whole body start to shake as I slowly looked back at the window and into the house. Maybe I had imagined it? But no. This person or thing in my house was now in the living room, still standing in that weird position and staring right at me, but now at least 10 feet closer. Fear and adrenaline shot through my veins in a way only a mother can know, and I practically yanked my daughter from these steps as we ran to the neighbor's house to get a spare key. And well, whatever was in my house was gone by the time that we returned, or at least out of eyesight from the window, but I did not let my daughter leave the neighbor's house until I had inspected every inch to make sure that there was no intruder. When I had more or less calmed down too and was positive that nobody was inside, the whole thing started to just seem more and more ridiculous as it played out in my head. The human brain automatically tries to give everything a logical explanation, so the more I thought about it, the more I was feeling like it had to have been imagined. I barely even considered calling the police. I mean, what would I say to them? "Hello, officers. I saw something in my house that looked exactly like my daughter, but I don't know what it is because she was standing right next to me when it happened." Absolutely not. I eventually chalked it up to just me being exhausted or whatever, because honestly, what else could it have been? And I mean, the last thing I wanted to worry about was some random thing in my house acting like the girl from The Ring. I didn't tell my daughter about my experience. I just sort of apologized for losing it a bit and told her that I thought I saw a wasp's nest. A terrible lie, truly, but she was either too tired or just didn't care enough to question it, and her and I went straight to the TV room to watch her favorite show, Criminal Minds. Now, this was not exactly my first choice of programs after whatever had just happened, but if it meant getting to keep an eye on my daughter for the night, I was more than happy to oblige. I know that I said that I chalked it up to my imagination, but I don't know. I still couldn't just shake that feeling that my girl was in danger. It tormented me in a way for the rest of the night too, and I must have checked up on her at least 5 times before she was sleeping. And now, over 3 years later, I still think about it frequently, and it seems less and less like a terrifying daydream. I am almost positive that there was something in my house that night. Anyway, Anyway, let me know your thoughts on what you think this all is. Am I just being dramatic? Nothing has happened since, and I never told my husband or anyone else, but it still worries me to this day. A few years ago, I was a university student in Eastern Washington, but dating a girl in Western Washington. I was visiting her for the weekend during the summer when we got into a huge fight around midnight, and I ended up leaving. I decided to head back to my apartment, and I mention this for context as to why I was driving through the pass after 1 in the morning. So, I'd never really gone through this pass so late before, and what is usually a very busy stretch of freeway on I-90 was completely empty at this time. I went well over an hour without seeing a single vehicle going either way, so naturally I was driving way too fast. At the time I had a 73 Chevy Nova. It wasn't quite the classic, but it had power and a complete lack of AC. Even though it was late at night, and the combination of a warm summer night and the large amount of heat that bleeds through some of the engine meant that I had my windows down, and I was still sweating. Not far into the east side of the mountains, around 1:30 I would guess, I hit a long stretch of straight road that doesn't really have an on-ramp or way to get into the freeway. When suddenly a set of headlights appeared behind me, something like maybe 200 feet back. I sort of glanced back at the lights, puzzled as to where that vehicle could have possibly come from. I noticed that despite the fact that I was absolutely hauling the lights, they were gaining on me. I decided to switch lanes and slow down a bit so it could pass. After a moment, the vehicle, now only half that distance, moved over behind me into the same lane. This is also when I began to panic. I mean, I'm in the middle of nowhere, hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour, and now I've got some aggressive driver running up on me. I watched too as those lights got closer. 60 feet, 50 feet, 40. In seconds it was upon me. It got so close too that I even braced against the steering wheel, expecting to get rear-ended by the vehicle, going much faster than me now. I watched in my rearview mirror in horror as those headlights blasted right into the back of my vehicle, and suddenly everything just froze. Like, quite literally. Nothing physically hit me, but the whole vehicle frosted over, and I could now see my breath. I hit the brakes, and I did my best to pull over despite not being able to see through the windshield, and every hair on my body was now standing on end. I got out of my vehicle and paced back and forth, examining my car, which was already starting to defrost as steams of water poured down it. There was no damage to my back bumper that I could see, and absolutely no sign of whatever vehicle had hit me. Eventually, I calmed down enough to get back into the car and drive the rest of the way back up, wake my roommates, and explain what just happened. The next time that I drove through that area in the daylight, right about where I think the ghost car had actually hit me, there, sitting on the side of the road, was a very old wooden cross, somewhat overgrown, that had been there for some time. So I'm a 13-year-old male, and I live somewhere in Alabama with my family. My dog Boomer, he has some good genes in his blood, so he's a good dog and all. He's a Doberman mix with some sort of a hound, so he has good guard dog genes in him, and hunting dog too, I think. Anyway, Boomer had different sounds for different things. He has his whiny bark for when he needs something. He has his kind of deepish bark that's equivalent to, hey, what's that? And then he has his aggressive bark when the thing that he's barking at gets too close. There's also the ghost howl, a chilling howl when he finds something, but that's another thing. So, I'm inside reading some stories on Reddit or something at some stage when I hear Boomer switching between his whiny bark and his deep bark. I go outside to check on him because, well, he might be stuck and or he sees a dog. So, I go outside and Boomer is looking at the area behind him while pacing back and forth and looking at me in the field area. I get closer to Boomer, and his ears go back and the fur on his lower back stands up, and he starts barking aggressively. When I stupidly get too close to find out what he's barking at, and when I get out of Boomer's chain length, we keep him on a chain because he's too big for the inside, and he also breaks other bindings. A man lunges at me, and out of reflex, I jerk backwards back to Boomer. Boomer barks some more, but the guy doesn't get the hint and just keeps coming at me. Boomer barks a final time before jumping up and biting his arm. The man screams in pain, alerting my grandma, who looks out the kitchen window and sees everything that's unfolding. She calls the cops, while my grandpa comes outside with his gun ready. The man, though, he kicked my dog and ran off into the night. Eventually the police showed up, but unfortunately they never found the guy. I guess that he knows that if he comes back that he'll probably get bit again or possibly shot, so I doubt that he's going to, but who knows what would have happened if my dog wasn't there that night. I was on a date in Camden with a girl who, from the photos, I wasn't overly excited about, but in the flesh, man, did she make my eyebrows shoot off. She was really pretty, smart, and funny. We had a few cocktails, and I think it was the Blues Kitchen before going to the gay bar in Camden, which has since closed down. I think it was called the Black Cap at some stage. Anyway, the date's going well, and we meet these people who join our table, and the guy tells me at the bar my date said that she wanted me to kiss her. I did, and it turned out that the guy was just helping us out by moving things along. My date was really shocked and told me that I was bold, but she liked it. She came back to my hotel room with me, which was a 10-minute walk away. The room was kind of small but cool and space agent style. We were both pretty drunk and made out a lot. Then she started crying about problems that she was having with a friend who was really sick and her job was really stressful. Full-on sobbing too. She left in embarrassment even though I was worried about her leaving like that, but she said that she would be okay. As she left, I saw a large man in a black thick leather jacket in the corridor though. He was staring at my date as she left and then stared at me as I closed the door. I was pretty wasted though, so after checking my date got on a bus, I had a bit of a nap and was woken up by banging on the door. I ignored it, but then it kept going, so I got up and staggered to the door and opened it a crack. And I recognized the leather elbow in the arm as the door was shoved open violently. I was drunk and the jolt of the door caused me to fall over. Luckily the room entrance was small and around the width of a door, so my back was against the wall by the door while my feet touched the other wall. My body kept the door closed as this man kept shoving against the door, but I managed to get it closed again, locked it, and went to sleep as I was still drunk. When I woke up in the morning, I honestly thought that I dreamt the man in the door. But when I looked down at the side of my ribs, hips and thigh too, I had these massive dark bruises there. I have no idea who that guy was or what he wanted, but I think that I was pretty lucky, and I'm really glad that the room was tight on space, because if it hadn't have been, that guy would have gone in really easily. Like I said, I have no idea who that guy was or what he wanted. I don't know if he was connected to my date in some way, but man, it was a really weird night. This is a bit of a long one, so please bear with me. So, before my dad came to North America, he was practicing to become a priest. In some cultures, it's widely believed that a priest should learn about and perform exorcisms. It's a very old world thing, but still pretty prevalent. And my grandfather, he used to perform them, and so did my great-grandfather. My dad has told me some of the stories, and they're pretty fascinating, I'll admit. I grew up in a very heavy Catholic household, but am not very religious myself. I mean, I would like to believe in ghosts and all that, but I've never really seen one. So naturally, when my dad told us stories, I was sort of a bit skeptical. But the one thing that my dad likes to hammer in is that I take after him. He believes that I have a gift like him, and he used to tell me that he was so successful with exorcisms because he has like a sixth sense or something and can feel, hear, and touch the supernatural. He can sort of understand them apparently, but I, on the other hand, there's no way that I can do that. My weird gift is being able to dream about things vividly, I suppose, and have them happen soon right after. At least, I think. It just feels a lot like deja vu, but I know what's about to happen, so it's a bit more than that, I think. I know it's more common than people think, so I don't really pay too much mind to it, but it is what it is. Now, one day, when I was about 14, my dad received a phone call. It was an acquaintance who knew of my dad and his work back home. Mind you, my dad had now become a therapist, the opposite of a priest, but anyway, another story, and hadn't done an exorcism in probably a decade that I know of at least. Side note as well, but my dad has always been liberal with parenting. My mum was a nurse and always working, so we spent a lot of time with him, and between me and my two other sisters, it was pretty much a free-for-all. But if my mum was there, she would have told my dad no way. So my dad takes the phone call, agrees to the job, and then looks at me. He announced that I'll be joining because I have his gift and he wants me to understand what he does. I'm like, whatever. But we eventually pull up to this big house in a more affluent neighborhood in our city, and I already feel a bit sick. I can't explain the feeling. It's like the moment that we drove into the driveway, I was sort of a bit nauseous and panicked maybe, for no reason too. I mean, it was a normal house, nothing out of the ordinary. I told my dad how I was feeling, and he quietly told me that we were going to go inside. There was a couple in their mid-40s that lived in that house. They had no children, just the both of them. The husband opened the door, and the first thing that I noticed was the bags under his eyes. The second thing I noticed was that the house had no lights on inside. After we entered, I felt like the air in the house was being sucked out of my lungs. I don't know really how to explain it, but it's sort of like if you put your mouth to a low-setting vacuum. Weird, I know, but it's sort of what it felt like.